So today we're gonna continue on Chris's story, and we will jump into where we left off last time. So I think it was a sports hotel, or at least whorehouse, or however you say it. It was in Latvia. There were some women.
Yeah.
Some people did sports, some people did some other stuff. And last time, vividly we explained how that environment looks like. So let's jump from there.
Yeah, so, right, nice to see you again on this lovely, sunny, glorious Estonian day.
Oh yeah, it's snowing.
Just been for it was actually, I made a joke the other day actually saying, the weather's great, but it will snow tomorrow, and it did. I've just been for a run actually, and I actually met one of the old Boltback guys. Who was actually on the HQ side of things. Very intelligent, very good man. And then we stopped for a chat, and we got talking about some things. And I did mention about this podcast. And he mentioned that he met a very senior person a year ago. And they got talking about things. And the answer was, we didn't make any mistakes. And we were both quite incredulous when we heard that comment. Obviously, this man last year and myself on the run, because it's impossible not to make a mistake. I thought I'd mention that because this now really is talking about something that I've always wanted to talk about on this podcast. And I think it's very important that people in Estonia understand what we did, because it's been forgotten. In fact, it's been more than forgotten. I think for some reason it's been buried. And that I will never understand. And perhaps during this conversation we may get some answers. We may get them from somebody else who actually, makes a comment. But that comment that I just mentioned was quite telling because I will talk about the sort of mentality of refusing to own up to mistakes. There's nothing wrong with making a mistake, but you've got to own it, and you've got to actually. I always find you can get a lot of good from a mistake because it tells you what was wrong, and it tells you, perhaps gives you a direction to go in. So I've got no problem with that, but refusal to admit a mistake and blindly continue always leads to a disaster. Leading on from that, yesterday I was also sent an article from a very well-renowned newspaper, and it was talking about the training problems they've got in the Ukraine, and some of the mindsets. And when I read that, I actually replied to it, and I just said quite simply, delete Ukraine and insert Estonia. And I could have wrote that article some time ago, and it would have actually described the situation that I saw here. So Estonia and Ukraine are not alone in the problems of the beginnings of converting from the previous Soviet times. And I think to Estonia's credit, it's changed a lot quicker than most. Unfortunately, from reading that article, I feel that the Ukrainians are still suffering from their Soviet past, which is a great irony.
Do you want to jump into that article? In a ways of like what were the main ideas, what you read from
one of the two main points that I took from it, because there were many.
I will grab a pen.
Yeah, sure.
I grabbed two because you never know when one quits on you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm good now.
Was that they still suffer from a Soviet mindset, and they don't care about the soldiers individually, and they do not concentrate or have any empathy for infantry training. And it was talking about, because also there were some younger people talking in the interview saying that to change, they've got to stop concentrating on the individual and not the mass. And they've got to get the individual soldier trained. Eureka moment. Unfortunately, that's very difficult to do in times of war when you need men now. Because my problem when I first changed uniforms in particular was that when I tried to pass the same message about we've got to concentrate on the individual, which then makes the team, the unit at each level, and that they can work together. And also, it is a welfare for your men that they can survive to fight. And it was actually Rommel who said in World War II, or before World War II, he said the best welfare you can give for your men in peacetime is hard, vigorous, ruthless training. So the Soviet mindset and the lack of care of the individual, the two main points. There's one other which I can't think of now. I'd have to refer to the letter itself when I replied to it, because there were many. Mm-hmm. But that struck home. And of course now they've got the other point in the article was they've got 1.5 months. What's that? 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 weeks to train people. And also in that 6 week period, there is many complaints that many people never actually got to do much, and that they had to watch things. So yet again, it goes back to explanation, demonstration, imitation, and progressive practice. All they got was an explanation, and if they were lucky, a one-time demonstration. Oh, the other point was that a lack of motivation from the trainers. And this I did notice in my early days in this new world, was that anybody who shone a little bit got the prized coffee job in an office, and if they had somebody join a unit who they felt didn't have much to offer, he got put on a training team. And I know this because I got heavily involved in units, speaking to people and trying to identify where they came from, what their capabilities were. And I was quite shocked by this because it was the reverse and opposite of everything the way we do business. It is the best guys become the trainers. And if you're not that good, obviously be honest here, he can become a rear echelon guy. Simple as that. Mm-hmm. But and this is not the only army where I've seen that. And even the British Army made this mistake some time ago, where the rear echelon would take the brightest, and if they found, let's be honest, stupid people, put them in the infantry. So those were some of the points that I got from the article, which I absolutely recognised, and there were many others, you know, and it really hit home.
Mm-hmm. Now it's a perfect way that you describe it, because I've been there after the war started in 2014, and I saw some of it. I saw the lack of training they didn't have, and that unit was at that time was called also Spetsnaz, that particular group of people that I saw. And they didn't have any training. They only had the previous Soviet era training, which wasn't training. It was nothing. It was you could barely call it anything.
Yes.
And then we had to show them kind of what is a react to contact drill.
Yeah, I totally get that.
And all of that kind of stuff. And that's I think something what has been going. So the problem 100% wasn't the guys on the front lines, because they understand that they need those things. It's the chain of command and upwards.
And it's not the trainer. It's not the individual. It's the system. I used to always say it's a system's fault.
It is the system.
It's a system's fault. So, in essence, when I read that article, I got quite angry to think that they've allowed themselves to get into this situation. And also, when I was thinking about this podcast and talking about bolt bat, and I hope I can get the message across, although much good was done, there were people in the higher command who crushed it. You do know what you do. You don't understand what you've done. You do not understand the good that you've killed off, or the good that you would not take. And I hope I can explain that as I go along with this story. So I thought I would mention that.
Yeah, I think I like this, and you actually got me to rabbit hole, which I want to still ask you one question based on that.
Go for it.
You said that like during the wartime, it's very difficult to get anything done because you need men, right? And it's hard to find do the right amount of training. Has there been an example that you're aware of from all the wars where someone has done a great job of training their men during a wartime?
Well, you can look to World War II. But there was still time. The Americans actually trained divisions en masse. But they still took a number of years. What saved Britain was that it was able to get its core army, which was the experienced officers and NCOs and men, off the beaches in Dunkirk. If Hitler had captured those people, Britain would have had to start from the beginning. Because whilst you can train a man to be an infantryman in a relatively short space of time, the leadership does need to mature like a fine whiskey. And that's often forgotten. And that's why often armies have only really used the junior leadership at officer level to lead properly, because they've got the mental capacity through higher learning to think through problems as they happen, which still isn't a great way without previous experience, but at least it's better than somebody who might be just as intelligent but just hasn't had the experience of learning or making or practicing his cognitive thinking. And that is why, if I can certainly look back on British Army history, where if you're below the rank of lieutenant, it's basically shut up and follow me. And as we've discussed earlier, that may work to a certain degree, but it means that the battle drills you use cannot be that deep or evolved, and the lieutenant does jobs which now are done by corporals in the British Army. And I can actually prove that point up until quite recently on the bolt bat, where we had Nordic captains who basically were not at the same standard of Royal Marine sergeants. And it wasn't their fault. The reason was that they came from a conscript army and they had a professional officers' corps and a non-professional rest of it. And because they had quite a large officer corps, there were not billets for the troop commander. And because the conscript leadership was understandably not that well trained, a lieutenant could actually be a section commander.
Mm.
And that I remember distinctly being told that by a captain. And it also reflects upon the Estonian army or any conscript army. If you've got a lower trained army at the grassroots section and platoon, the troop commander becomes the de facto commander of every subunit within that group, because he can't trust them to do anything. Mm-hmm. And of course, that troop commander then never gets to be a proper troop commander to learn as well. So it's actually a vicious circle, and that circle is shit. And it's made worse if that troop commander actually becomes the company commander straight away and actually ends up doing all the administration. And I think you've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got, at best, one of the better conscript sergeants becomes the troop commander.
Mm-hmm.
That's something to dwell on, because we're going down that rabbit hole again.
Yeah, so that's a good answer. Like Second World War, Americans
but
did
Second
it
World War,
with divisions, and
they did do it with divisions, but they did it over a number of years.
Yeah,
I mean, Great Britain, for example, because they got back the main core leadership, and they got them back to Britain. I mean, in essence, they didn't fight until 1944.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like what Europe is doing at the moment, kind of.
You know, yeah. Well, you know, that's you need time to train your soldiers and train your leadership. You do need time. Now, of course, going back to a conversation we had before, and quote unquote, if they come back, we may lose 50%, but we will learn quickly. Yeah, you're right. But that's if they come back in 1999. Why? In fact, no, 1993. Why are you making that comment many years later? Mm-hmm. But it's to justify, I'm just going to say it, laziness, a lack of focus on the real problems, and the comfortable office lives. But equally important, the old Soviet mindset. Because going back to that article, it reflects, and it does reflect the same thing. It talked about all its losses. It said that they are suffering. When they put the new guys on the front line, a lot of them run away, a lot of them can't fight, and a lot of them die. Mm-hmm. So in a short space of time, it is actually, you lose a lot, well more than 50%. Mm-hmm. So you could argue that he was wrong. It's not 50%, it's 80% if you're lucky on a good day. My reply was, we've got 20 years. Let's get focused and train properly now. And you know what? Get rid of the idiot, because we know there's lots of idiots. We know there's lots of people who can't do the job. We know there's lots of officers who shouldn't be officers. Get rid of them, start small, and then once you start small, and every man can become a very good soldier and leader at every level. They can also expand quickly with their leadership. For a corporal can become a sergeant quickly in times of war. A good sergeant can become a troop commander. A troop commander can easily become a company commander, because they've got a springboard to come from. And it's how the German army did in the 30s. The German army was restricted in the 20s and 30s to a 100,000 man army. So they actually made sure that every man they took was superior. And when the German army expanded, these people became leaders.
Mm-hmm. They created force multipliers.
Yes.
Which is a smart thing to do.
Very smart. And what annoys me is that I have trained people from different parts of the world, and the Estonians are the best people I've ever come across to train. They learn very quickly. They're very smart. And it's infuriating that when there's the opportunity to have trained properly, they've just been ignored. So it's not the man, it's the lack of training. And going back to what I've said before, I will not criticise that man if he's not been taught properly. I'll just try and help him.
Yeah, that's how it is. I really understand what you mean.
Yeah, you've seen it. You know, if you've gone through it, so you've seen it, and the only way you got out of it was by going the SF route.
Yep.
It's a crying shame, because the quality of the Estonian population is absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So I believe that if you could and you could change, because there are also many good things out there. Many good things have been done, and it's why I say putting the jigsaw pieces together, you can form that correct picture of how it should be, and then continue. But if I now go back to the bolt bat, maybe I can build a picture of what could have happened.
Baltic Battalion, right?
Yeah, the Baltic Battalion. And it's funny because I've heard even 10 years ago, there's going to be a new Baltic Battalion. I don't know what the hell happened, but it certainly wasn't the Baltic Battalion that I knew. Something in name only. So going back to the Baltic Battalion, I talked about the women smelling, and I do apologise to Latvian ladies because they were really gorgeous. They were really gorgeous. But it was just an observation which was quite unique, because not only was I astounded by how well dressed they were, but I also realised later they were quite poor and they only had one good dress. But they really looked after themselves. And it's something that I think many people in the West, especially the ladies, and even the men, can think about. You've got a lot of money and you dress like a bag of shit. These people held their heads high. They walked upright, as did the Estonians, because they were proud of themselves, regardless of the circumstances. I admired that, and I learnt from that. I thought it was super. But yeah, when a beautiful woman would walk past you and you'd actually get a whiff like she was a street tramp, you'd be like, whoa, what's going on? It was quite confusing. But it's also fascinating to see that, as I said, time travel does exist, because I did actually go back to the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And I sent you those photographs to try and give you a sort of smidgen of, how it was. I loved it. I loved it. It's what I joined up for. I joined up to see the unusual.
It must have been super unusual.
It's
like you get to send to North Korea.
Yeah, it was.
Like, what is that about?
There was no bars as such, but there's one place that could be termed a bar called the Jazz Club in Riga. And it was like being transported back to the 70s. Everybody had long hair. They were wearing flared trousers. They were surprisingly drinking bottles of vodka. And I thought, how can they afford that? But then in Latvia, the vodka in the bar cost the same as the shop. And it was about, I think it was about 1 lat for a bottle. So, and to buy a premium beer in a can could have been a bit more. So I sort of understood later why they were doing it. And they were playing guitars.
Had a lot of illegal vodka going around.
Yeah, maybe that as well. But it was dirt cheap. It was everywhere. Mm-hmm. And when that vodka bottle got opened, it got finished.
That's what I actually saw in Ukraine. Same way, still.
Yeah, and I also know. I asked this once. I said, why aren't the bottle tops on the vodka screw on, screw off? And the answer was, well, no. Once you open it, you're going to drink the lot. Yeah, happy days. So it's fascinating to watch. Well, a bit of people watching. I think being in the military does make you an observer of things, and I was fascinated by the things I saw.
So I assume that was your part of the first recce information that you collected.
That was part of the first recce. It was the opposite of some of the things I thought they would be. The women were gorgeous. What we were led to believe in old films were, it's just big fat grandmas, and everything was
propaganda.
It was propaganda, yeah. And the flip side of the coin is, I always remember thinking this: in American movies, everybody's body perfect,
and in reality, they are not.
In reality, they're very overweight. Mm-hmm. In the Russian movies that we produced, everybody's quite overweight and a bag of shit, for want of a better word. And the reality was, everybody's gorgeous. Mm-hmm. I was gobsmacked by that, and to be quite honest, I was very happy with it. And a funny anecdotal story in that hotel stroke whorehouse. You could tell that the cleaning ladies had been in the room because you could smell the body odour.
They tried.
Yeah, it was weird. That was weird. Anyway, so it was a little joke, yeah. The cleaning ladies had been in. There wasn't much to clean, actually. But how do you know? I can smell it. But you know what? In fairness, it was because hot water was very hard to get hold of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very cold. So I think in the winter months, because it's so cold, people didn't wash much because of their living conditions. And I get it, you know. So in fairness, that's why. And I learned later that having hot water was a real luxury. So the things that I started to notice, which I had taken for granted, hot water was the big one. And when you haven't got hot water, you start to realise what a luxury it is. When you can't just walk in from a run and go and get a hot shower. When you haven't got it, it's like, yeah. And you may not have water for a number of hours. So I remember that. So those early days were showing the old Soviet infrastructures, and also we did lose a load of weight because they'd signed a memorandum of understanding with the Latvian government. But of course, they still provided to us, as they would do, they would provide to the Latvian army. So when we stayed in this hotel, when we got our food, as we later found out, because it was so small, the guy who ran the hotel said, well, look, I've only been given so much a day to feed you. So there you go. It was difficult to find things in shops, but what you could find was bread. So I would go and buy some bread to try and supplement the ration. It was okay. It's what, as I say, what I joined up for wasn't the first time I'd been a bit hungry, but my only observation really was I was quite fascinated by the circumstances. So we went back to UK for Christmas leave, and when we came back in January, it was to meet the troops. And I sent you that photograph of the Estonian troop, who, when we first met, we had that photograph taken. And they're in Estonian uniform. That uniform was later changed to an American uniform. And
Woodland, I think.
Yeah, and I actually now think it was a mistake. So I am going to leap ahead a little bit. They had a Baltic Battalion berry, which I thought was really good, a black berry with a really nice cap badge. And as you know, a distinctive berry gives you unit identity. And if you're special, it gives you something extra. So it can mean a lot when you see the berry. Now, when I talk about the uniform, I've also got to say that all the equipment we had was donation. I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. But it meant that they had American uniforms. Now, whilst you could argue it unified the three platoons, it also, I think, caused a division between their own army, which was to have severe repercussions at a later date. So I think that the basic uniform, which was adequate, should have been kept by each platoon to signify their own country, and the berry would have been the component to have unified them as the Baltic Battalion. That's my own opinion, based on the divide that happened at a later stage where it became two armies. So the team was made up of the British infantry trainers, which were the Royal Marines, and the remainder came from Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. I don't think I've missed anyone out.
Mm.
They did change quite a lot.
The countries or the personnel?
Their personnel from
Okay.
the Nordic countries, they didn't seem to last too long.
Well, they didn't like the conditions. Like
Well, actually, that was one.
like
Of,
you
that,
did.
was one of the problems. Actually, yeah, that was one of the problems. I think I've got to talk a little bit of politics.
Mm-hmm.
And these are some things that I didn't know at the time. And some of the things then, at my pay grade, I certainly was not interested in. I knew my job. And that's all I need to know. I don't need to get into the weeds of the hows and whys. The Baltic Battalion was a Danish initiative. And I think I'm remembering the name correctly, and there's no harm in mentioning it, because he does deserve actually a recommending well done. Colonel Carlson, I believe it was. I think may still be alive. I did meet him once. It was his initiative to use the members of the Baltic states to train them to a Western standard, to then be used by Nordic countries when they go on missions. And the reason, stroke excuse, was that they are short of men.
Mm.
I'm not convinced of that, and I'll explain why in a minute. To that end, it was decided, not by the Brits but universally, that the best trainers for infantry were Britain.
Mm-hmm.
We came under the Foreign Office, and we were detached from the Royal Marines under the umbrella and organisation of the Foreign Office. And it was the leader of the Foreign Office who decided which troops would be used, and he chose the Royal Marines because of what he saw on his travels. And I think we were uniquely cut out for this. We're very flexible, very professional, no problem whatsoever. The Nordics were to get involved in at the early days, the logistics and administration roles, and also for political purposes. There was a Nordic, or let's just say a Scandinavian officer on each training team. So that's Royal Marine training team, because the training team was subdivided into 3 groups of 3. In my case, for Estonia, we had a Finnish lieutenant. All good. So that was the initial
Task org.
That was the and of course there was our boss, a lieutenant colonel. We had a sergeant major, and a second in command, a Royal Marine captain. So we had basically, in essence, 3 HQ and 3 subunits of 3, which were training team, and we were all senior NCOs and platoon weapon instructor first classes. Mm-hmm. Now normally, a platoon weapon instructor first class would be minimum a company asset. So this is a very high concentration of platoon instructor first classes. And I think in the Corps there was only 60. So they took 10% of the Corps' PW1s. Mm-hmm. So at least the Corps took it very seriously in this case, and it was a wise decision to make. Now I say politically because in those days, 1994, and perhaps it was 1993 when this was put forward, this was only 2 years after the Soviets had left. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't know then that NATO had made some verbal or written agreement with the Russians that NATO would not expand. Now, on a personal level, as far as I'm concerned, if Estonia wants to be part of NATO, nobody else has a right to say they can't be.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that.
Yep.
But that was the political situation in those days when the Soviet bear had just left and everybody was worried they were going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to Paldiski, there were still Russian troops there guarding the nuclear reactor. So whilst I didn't take this into consideration then, I know my hierarchy did. And it was a very, very sensitive time about what we were doing in the Baltic states.
Yeah, because even you can also say that the first general of Estonia was Einsen, and he served in the U.S. Army in the Green Berets, I think.
Yep.
And then eventually he came he gave away his background in the U.S. and he became the first commander in chief of the army. And I think that he straight away rewrote the paper, which kind of said that when a foreign, entity crosses the border, we will go to war.
Mm-hmm.
Because they learned kind of from the Second World War.
Yeah, because basically the government just said no, said we're going to, that's it.
Yeah,
they're not allowed to do it now.
Yeah. So
that was to make sure they, basically in essence, it ensured that Estonia could not be betrayed. Well, be careful how I use that word. Estonia wants to fight and will fight if it happens again.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because Estonia also in the 30s had a tremendously good army.
Mm-hmm.
And quite a big army.
Yep. And interesting enough that the first general, he didn't last too long. And I'm quite sure it was because of the system.
Yeah, I could actually go down another rabbit hole with this, but I'm gonna try and leave. I'm biting my tongue not to say something actually, because you could. I can say this without going too far ahead. It is actually ideal in many ways that a former American Estonian Green Beret, as the Chod, would understand completely what we were doing and integrate it into the Estonian Defence Forces.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the way things have turned out, this would have been and I've always felt this. This is you could not have at the beginning started a better way to start the process of being integrated into NATO.
Mm-hmm. Because imagine the Brits roll up. When they did, the British Army actually have got a lot to thank me for, because if they rolled up and the Estonian Army was doing something 360 to how they do business, it would be very difficult to work with them. Mm-hmm.
And as I'm sure you know yourself, when you've been on ops, that some guys from Eastern Europe who've still retained, you could say, hate saying it, but some Soviet identity due to their past. They've got all the equipment but no training, and they end up basically doing all the shitty jobs of guarding the camp because they can't be trusted to do the job and they're a liability.
Mm.
Another rabbit hole. Okay, so Einzel, I could argue, was the right man at the right time then, but I would also argue that, as I now know, due to experience, that General Kurt was actually even better. And I'm going to explain why at a later time. But I will say the biggest mistake that the Estonian government ever made was removing him from his position of chod so early. Because he had the vision, because he saw what was happening with the troops being trained for the Bortbat. And when he was put in a lower position where he did not have the same power and influence, the people who took over didn't have the vision of that. They had the Soviet vision.
Mm-hmm.
And that has put back Estonian training by many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
I'll explain that in greater detail later, but that's
yeah, to me that's interesting. Like in general, like way is that while we got free, because I've heard Eisen's or General Eisen's memoirs, and it's interesting, like how that there was a point of time in this right moment that there is a guy who has done such a long career and been in wars, and now you have one guy to come and start cleaning up house with his background for a small country like Estonia. I mean, it's just kind of like like it doesn't really look. You couldn't plan on it because it's just random.
But the problem being was that so many other people were from that Soviet world.
Yeah. Most of it.
So I think he was probably hated by many of his subordinates.
Absolutely. He went into the hornet's nest.
Oh yes, and I suffered from this myself.
Mm.
And also because he was in America for so long, and Estonians are very, very exonphobic, which is the fear of outsiders.
Mm.
I haven't got a problem with that, because I think it's helped to keep your identity through all the hundreds of years of occupation. So I've got no problem with that. But sometimes it has led to unfortunate actions.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst Einsel is an Estonian, he's also an American Estonian. And I know that would have led to some backstabbing,
Mm-hmm.
which would have made it easier to have removed him. So yeah, leaping ahead, but there's nothing wrong with saying this now. Einsel and Kurt were the ideal characters to be in that position at that time, if only they had stayed.
Mm-hmm.
But that story will be completed at a later stage, so it makes sense, and I can justify why I said that.
So you had a team there already.
We've got a team. So we've got the team there,
Mm-hmm.
and now we just need the people to train. Now, I've got to go back to that MOU again,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that yet again I never gave a damn about then at that stage. But now that I know more about things, I realise that MOUs are so important, that memorandum of understanding between countries. Now the good news was it had been signed at the highest levels. The bad news is nobody wants to do anything about it. For example, we are meant to live in apartments which are outside of Darzi camp, which makes sense.
Mm.
We get up in the morning, we can walk across to the camp. So they signed this piece of paper and then did nothing. You know? And I've got to make these points now because I think some listeners, especially in these parts of the world, will understand this. So yeah, great, everybody's, yeah, great, we signed that, yes, we're going to do that, and then it's forgotten. It's forgotten. It's almost as if these people think things happen by magic.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't come from that world. We come from when you are told this, and this is in place. It is in place.
Mm-hmm.
However, we being who we are, if it's not so, we will find a way to get by. So we had to stay in this. I will call it the hotel. We will stay in the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very good little boys. And the old ladies in the concierge, for want of a better word, started to take a real shine to us, which was quite nice. Because we were so well behaved. And not being naughty. And, no, bearing in mind, most of the guys are married, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have to travel in the morning an hour in a bus. And I did send a picture of this.
Mm-hmm.
This was a fascinating experience because it was a small Volkswagen minibus, and it was held together with masking tape and other devices because it was so old. A bit like the situation in Cuba, where they don't get any spare parts. And I was fascinated then how the local people were able to make do with things that were so old and they still worked because they had to. So that's a positive. The negative was that the driver thought he was driving a Ferrari. And it's something you may not know about, but in the early days, the Baltic states were the third most dangerous place in the world to drive.
Mm.
And I actually read that in the Baltic magazine, which was about 1995, 96.
Mm.
And I read it and I thought, yeah, it is, because I used to see crazy accidents, which you would. I saw a car once in a tree. It was like a Die Hard movie.
And nobody wore a seatbelt. Nobody.
So we're traveling, and it's also we're having a proper winter.
Yeah.
And this guy would overtake vehicles, and he would pull out, and you'd see the headlights coming in the opposite direction.
Mm-hmm.
And he would just be able to pull in just in time. The thing is, the vehicle didn't have any great acceleration, and almost in the back of the vehicle, we're all like trying to move our feet, trying to make the vehicle go faster. You know, we're gonna die.
I had the same experience in Georgia.
Yeah, you know where I'm coming from. It is crazy. It is crazy.
It's just craziness.
And the driver thought he was impressing us. He thought, oh yeah, I'm Steve McQueen. No, if you got to die, you got to die. But
That's
dying in Latvia in a Scooby truck with a mad driver who thinks he's Steve McQueen is not a good way to go.
No. At least we were sitting on we had a Land Cruiser. We were not allowed to put seatbelts on because if you put a seatbelt on, you disrespect the driver.
Yeah.
And
it's
then
crazy,
the only thing what we could do is to just drink ourselves to.
Yeah, I get it.
Oblivion.
Actually, we solved that problem because we didn't have seatbelts.
Yeah.
We didn't have seatbelts.
You didn't have that. There's no problem to solve. Yeah, easy.
And so that was 2 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And we would start work at 8, so we'd leave at 7. And then one day I said to our boss, he's going to kill us. And next day we actually did go off the road. and it landed as safely as it could do in such a situation, and we were able to dig it out. But the vehicle's at this angle on a bank. And we just know we've come that close to death. And my boss looked at me, and I looked at him, and he just gave me that look of, yeah, I think you were right. But he didn't say anything because of, yet again, the political situation, because they get so offended.
Mm-hmm.
And he
was. Understand what you mean.
We did get a new driver next day.
Mm-hmm.
But that guy was we still kept on doing other jobs, and he always gave us dirty looks. It was a big offence to him, big offence. Hey, but we lived to fight another day. So that was, what I called the craziness, part one. That was one of the crazy things. The combination, the apartments, yet again, these apartments were the normal infrastructure that you see in Paldiski. The blue walled skeleton Soviet buildings, because they've been made to spec. They're just everywhere throughout the Soviet Union.
Yep.
That was just a shell. But my boss, we'd learnt something actually. My boss said to the government, look, you better start working on it, because we're going to move in whether you finished it or not, because we're not staying in that hotel any longer. And it's amazing. They then started to do some work. So they had to be put under pressure and threatened with the MOU, and that because we could at least talk back to the Ministry of Defence in London and the Foreign Office, and they would then talk at this high level, and then shit would happen downwards. So it was actually, you had to talk to a government to get things happening.
Well, I think that reflects very well on how that system works. That's the centralized leadership.
Yeah.
Only you get the only things going from that this way. There's no middle part.
But at least it was there. Because, well, it was terrible that you've got to go to that level. But you could also argue, if we talked about things that I'd seen here, well, nothing happened unless you went to the chod. And that just causes stagnation. And you do leadership, and you've been in the military. You need initiative. It kills initiative.
Absolutely.
And also, what he may not know or not want to know, especially when you've got the Soviet mindset. So from you just know straight away he's going to tell me to get out of the office. So it creates stagnation.
Yeah, it like in that system, it's like when you show initiative, it's a bad thing.
Oh, you get crushed.
Yeah, it's not a good thing.
Crushed.
So that's why
you've got to walk into that office knowing what he wants you to say. And if it's not what he wants you to say, which basically is his thoughts, you're history.
Yep.
And that's a terrible, terrible way to run an organization.
And actually, it's what's unique about it, in relatively and psychologically, it's very weird that this thing can look brilliant in barracks.
Yes.
But it does terrible in actual combat. It's the worst.
Well, it is in its truest sense Pakazuka.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's why I talked about HQ-centric armies and why I despise them, because everything becomes about the HQ. And of course, when you go to the HQ, first of all, it's one of the biggest HQs I've ever seen. It's fully staffed. Everybody's well dressed, fit looking. Ribbons, medal ribbons everywhere. And you get a guard of honour. And without a doubt, visitors are very impressed. But it's smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
It is bullshit, yeah. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. And in my early days, I was in British uniform then. And when I did visit headquarters, very occasionally, and it was actually to go there and tell them the bad news, actually, I noticed something which I only put together later, was that everybody is drawing graphs. And when they've drawn a graph, they go and draw another one. And when they've drawn another one, they rip those two up and start again. It's just planning. It's planning and planning and planning with no action. And people were trying to justify their existence. So they spent all day making plans that were going to go nowhere.
They're just stuck in another loop. They're just observing and orienting.
You know.
Never getting to decide, never getting to action.
No. But I didn't understand that then. But I've got a good memory. When I started to put my memory pieces together, the jigsaw, I started to form a picture of like, wow, that's what I saw. Crazy, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we were having to get to governmental levels to get things done, but we did get things done. It was slow but sure. And they made one apartment and we moved straight in. Things were not ready though. Things were not ready, but we soon found out that if you don't move, they just won't continue. And the same thing happened when I moved to Estonia, actually. And I did the same thing. I just moved in. And I'll get to that point in some time later.
Mm-hmm.
So we eventually moved into our apartments. And they were good, actually. They were good. We had our own rooms. But we had... the electricity would always crash. Because it was not used to that many people using the system, and it was old wires and everything else. So if we all came back from work and had a shower, which we would do, well, everybody having a shower would then overload the system, so darkness. So we were still paying the price for the poor infrastructure. Although eventually, what was very good, one of the Nordics got over an expert in this, and apparently what he did was a little bit naughty, but he managed to do some rewiring. I don't know what he did, but it worked, and that was brilliant because we're having to boil water for a wash. And after about 2 or 3 months, now we had hot water on tap, and our cookers worked also. And because it was taking 3 hours every evening to cook, to boil water and to cook food on such limited means, although the kitchen was quite well equipped and it looked nice, it wasn't supported by the correct infrastructure to support the energy to it. Yeah, again, we took that on the chin. On the chin, and after 3 months, it was fairly normal. We found out later that when the Russians left, when the Soviets left, I'm trying to make a
difference.
Yeah, a difference, because there was a difference.
Yep.
They'd actually sabotaged the water pipes, and the sewage was going into our drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how they found it out. Perhaps as they started to do work on the camp and trying to rebuild its infrastructure, they found out where the pipes were leading to. I have to admit though, whilst I wasn't impressed with that, none of us became ill. The camp itself was in the same condition because when the Soviets left, they'd smashed all the radiators. Anything of note they damaged. So it was quite a wreck.
Everything you can steal, they stole.
Yeah, they took it. Mm-hmm. So it was smashed or taken.
Yep.
But it did have the buildings. And concurrently, as we were working, the Latvian labourers were refurbishing the camp. It obviously wasn't to a high standard, but it was to a livable standard. And I think everybody took it, as we say, took it on the chin. Just it's the way things are, just tough. I don't think the Nordics were too happy, but it didn't bother me. Yet again, I found it quite fascinating. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, the headquarter building was okay.
Absolutely, it's always like that.
So we had the top floor in this headquarter building. So the Nordics, who were doing let's just say the admin infrastructure side of things, and we had our own team offices.
I wonder if there is a army or a place in history where the frontline troopers lived better than the HQ.
No, never. I mean, even when I was on the Canberra, you know, I do laugh about it. I was very happy on the Canberra. If you're going to go to war on a cruise liner.
Mm.
But we were in K Company, 4-2 Commando, the rifle company. Well, we were on D deck. The A deck is the best, then B deck, C deck, and D deck. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that always amused me. The HQ got A deck, of course.
Of course.
But I actually have a sense of pride actually in that. Yeah, but it is very normal, and you just got to laugh at it. Yeah, the frontline troops always get shafted, and that's why there's a inherent hatred, which I don't think is too strong a word actually, that a frontline soldier can have in war about the rear echelon, because they get to take the good things as it goes to the front.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a book once, and I was amazed by it. In World War II, when they sent equipment from UK, because UK was basically just like the base for everything to go to, and then be transported to Europe until they could establish bases in Europe to go directly to.
Mm-hmm.
But when they supported D-Day and the invasion, they actually multiplied the supply by 100% because they expected to lose 100% in pilfering. And I thought, in war, people in rear are going to do that. Oh yeah.
Yep.
And a lot of people got quite rich.
That's what's happening at the moment.
Yes.
Actually,
Ukraine. Yes. Yes, it is. So there is a relevance to this.
Absolutely. It happened then. Yes, it happens now.
It's even in the Falklands. We got told, you're going to get a resupply of fresh socks and a new pair of trousers, and they never came. Not even those basic things. We got nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There were some confectionery giants in UK who picked up on the fact that there were certain sweets we like Mars bars, and they donated literally 1 million Mars bars. We never got them. As I said, nowadays I can laugh about it, but where did they go? Somebody got fat on them, or.
But it's a good reminder to me that it happened with Western troops.
Everybody. We all suffer from that. It's to degrees of how much you suffer. That's why, as I said, my father said, there's only one person going to look after you. And the rifle companies, we've got our Bergens, and what's in it is what you're going to survive with, because you're going to get nothing else. And of course, you do have to be resupplied with food. But if you don't, you can suffer for quite a long time. And that did happen to us.
Mm-hmm.
Because the rations did not get to us for reasons. But I do also know, reading books and talking to people in the rear had a good time. For example, I read that somebody in the rear gave a box of 10 rations to a family because they gave them a bath. And there's me freezing my ass off in the mountains with nothing.
Mm.
But I take pride in that. I take pride. And that's why I say I was rifle company. I was a squad leader. I was in the front, not in the rear with the gear.
Mm.
Right. So I'm sure you're the same. There's a certain amount of soldierly pride in that you suffered. Still unfair though.
Yep.
So where were we? So the infrastructure.
Infrastructure, HQ had a good building.
Yeah, the HQ always gets the best.
So now you already have the men there, or?
We've got the men there. They have been learning English. I found this out later. They've been learning English. In fact, from where I live, it's just across the road. I think it's in Cadwell. There's an art museum, Kunst museum, and before it was that museum, they learned English there, or started to learn English there. So, whilst we were getting ready for coming out here, and we started in August, about September time, in the 3 Baltic states, the soldiers had to start to learn English, which later actually became a very good thing for their future careers in Civilian Street. And we actually lost a lot of people after we trained them and they did one tour, because having people who could speak English in those early days was a massive advantage, because nobody spoke English. Nobody spoke English. And that was another, I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but everywhere I've been in the world, South America, go to South America, go into a bar, give me a beer, they understand. So we can become quite ignorant with our English language. We can become very ignorant because so many people speak it in the world. But the Iron Curtain did draw a line where learning English was only allowed to certain people. And I actually talked to the Baltic Battalion commander about this, Alar Lanneman, who actually I like very much. But he was actually a political officer in the Soviet forces. And I don't know what got us onto the subject, but he told me that if you were learning English in the Soviet Union, you could get a knock on the door from the KGB asking why you were learning the enemy's language. Because if you are able to communicate, you could be a danger to the system. So the only people who were allowed to learn English were people who were vetted and could use it. For example, KGB learned English. So nobody spoke English, and that would later cause what I termed the language prison. But for the Baltics, for the Baltic Battalion, it wasn't a problem because the guys learnt English, because that was the NATO language. Getting onto NATO now, because when I talked about the political aspects, I said, boss, we're not training these people to go on missions, are we? We're training them to fill in this space. I'm not going to say it. And he said to me, don't say that, don't say that. I will say it now. It is obvious that we were training these guys to fight anywhere and to obviously protect their own countries. Why not? Because that became a problem later on when they attacked the Baltic Battalion, because they said they can't fight, which was the complete opposite of what they could do. And we trained them as far as we could as Royal Marines. So they had a good standard of infantry training. Because if you go on a peace mission, the ideal soldier is a disciplined, well-trained soldier who can, at the flip of a switch of a situation, can turn into a warfighter, because on a mission, they can become hostile. And as I found, that if you do have to deal with these people, if they think you are weak, they will take advantage of you. But if they know that you can flip a switch and become your world's worst nightmare, they, okay, we do what you say. I think you understand where I'm coming from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I will say though that I've seen a video of the guys in the early days, and I was surprised how, this is not a criticism, how bad their English was, but I was basing it on now talking to the guys now. So it's a sublime thought, because at the time, regardless of the shortness in time that they were learning, they did learn enough, and we were able to communicate. And I'm saying this actually as a very big well done, because not only did the Baltic soldiers have to learn these new skills, they had to learn it in a foreign language which they had only just started to learn. So I've got nothing but praise for these guys, nothing but praise, absolute praise.
Mm-hmm.
So we were lacking in the niceties of the infrastructure, and it was progressing as we progressed on the tour. If we had said we're going to wait, nothing would have happened. So we forced it by being in situ. Fortunately, the accommodation for the lads wasn't fantastic, but as a soldier, it's a bed, it's a roof, we've got water, because we did insist they fixed the water for them. The food was terrible. The food was terrible. Oh, it's funny now looking back on it. Okay. The commanding officer of Adaji camp was a Soviet officer in a Latvian uniform. I'm sure he was totally 1,000% loyal to Latvia. But you see, you must reflect your background. And he was behaving like a Soviet colonel. And we've just talked about this. Nothing happened on that camp from the Latvian side unless it went through his door. So nothing happened unless he agreed to it, which caused this very long process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the quartermaster, we found out, provided them, he would be given money to go and buy the rations. So far, so good. Now, I can't prove this, but we think that half of that money went in his pocket, which is standard practice from that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lack of food to be prepared, but it was enough. Potatoes, lots of potatoes. Oh, let's have some more potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Little bit of meat. Now, I'll explain this because it just, I think, encapsulates the circumstances of lots
absolutely.
of things.
I like it.
Now the chefs, the cooks, were just the conscripts. Now the good news was that from somewhere, the Latvians had been donated a kitchen, a military kitchen, which was basic but thorough. The bad news is nobody had taught anybody how to use it. So everything was boiled or fried in a pan. The people who were the cooks were just ordinary conscript soldiers who were told, today you're going to be the cook and you're going to make the food. That was it. The same as, here's a rifle, you're a soldier, job done. Same rationale.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some sort of cabbage type vegetable which was boiled to the max. So that was the staple food. And you notice that their hands were just grubby and dirty. And I felt sorry for them, It wasn't their fault. But it was just, as I said, I could find it nothing but fascinating, because I could think about, wow. It made me appreciate my army. It made me appreciate what we had. It really made me appreciate.
It's a pretty ridiculous contrast. But I mean,
Oh,
how it sounds like it's kind of similar to what I just wrote down is that, like, Estonians 30 years ago were very similar with Afghans and Iraqis compared to where we now went there.
But, you know, some while back I sent you some photographs of the soldiers that I took some pictures of in my early days at the battle school. And, well, I'm quite sure if a lot of Estonians saw that now, they'd be quite taken aback with that. And that's not a criticism, because it's what they had. It's what they had. You've got to start from somewhere. So, but it's good to be reminded when you see all these pictures of nice equipment on soldiers. It wasn't always like that. And that's why you've got to say, regardless of the circumstances, how far Estonia has travelled in such a short space of time relatively.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Just nothing but absolute. I've got nothing but praise for that. But it's good to be able to reflect and see the two, because then you can appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you
puts things in perspective.
Exactly, because otherwise you forget, and then you complain about how good thing you are living a good life, and you complain, and you think you've got to be reminded you've got a great life. Do not complain.
Yeah,
I'm a great believer in that. It's so easy to get caught in that trap, you know, where you depress yourself every day because you think you should have more or you should have better, when in fact you live like a king now and you don't even understand it compared to the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I look back on that and I'm fascinated by it now, looking back. The reason I know about this issue because later on in our deployment, our boss got a Royal Marine Sergeant chef to come out, because we also have a chef's branch. Now we self-maintain. So a Royal Marine Chef Sergeant came out and he took over the money and bought the produce, and he cooked very good meals with the same money.
And the same products, probably.
Yep. It was great. But did they learn from it? No. As soon as he went, it went back to shit again. That I do find frustrating.
Welcome to the system.
Yeah, well, and you know what? I've suffered that myself many times. You walk away, and it just goes back to shit.
Yeah, it's the old habits are just so strong.
Yes,
That's what it is. And it's same with the leadership training, like, or whatever training you do. If you do it for one day, it means nothing. It means nothing.
No, but what I also found is, with the old mentality, is if you do it once, oh, I'm now perfect, I never need to do it again.
Oh no, everyone becomes an instructor.
Yeah, he's an instructor. Because I used to be criticised. Why are we doing that again? Well, because you're not very good at it. And even if you're good at it, we can do progressive practice, and you can learn some more, because it's a very important skill. And when you become a good soldier and you understand, you appreciate this, and it's what we talked about before. The people who don't know think they know everything. And the people who are I hate using that word expert, but more knowledgeable, who understand that they will never know everything, can't transmit information to these people because they have got blinkers to their eyes.
It's the human nature as well, because then you look smart because you're the only one who knows. And to me, like, there's this kind of, I don't know, whatever the psychology is behind it, but that's how I'm describing to our customers, that when they leave our day of training, I say that like 65%, like 10% theory, 25% demonstration, 65% practice. Now everyone leaves there as an instructor, and what I tell them that they should do, and they start going and telling everyone the 10% what they just learned. They haven't demonstrated anything, they haven't practiced anything either, but for whatever reason they are now an instructor. Now what they need to be living from that course is as a team member. Now team member does reverse. They start practicing, they go and start testing 65%. Now they become a demonstrator, and eventually someone comes and asks you, hey, how are you doing it, because it seems to work. Now that's the only time when you can start talking about the 10% theory to someone, because before that nobody asked, and your job is to be a teammate, not an instructor, because you don't know.
Well, that's why that to select an instructor, he has to be good at his job that he's going to teach. Because what I learned when I crossed over to the instructional branch of the Royal Marines, was that whilst I could do, I thought yeah, if you put me in a corner, I can teach that. I could certainly practice it and give advice. But especially when it came to teaching what I thought were skills that I didn't need to teach to anyone again, and you had to start from the beginning, I wouldn't really know how to do it. I could sort of get away. This is it. I could sort of get away with it. But then he could sort of get away with it. So we get into this trap of we sort of do it, and then you get into the trap of, well, we sort of think it's okay. And I'm now the so-called sort of supervisor. And then there's this cycle of shit again, where we sort of think it's okay, because you don't know. So when I did my instructor's course, which was also renowned as being a ninja course, I learnt a great deal and was put under great pressure to perform well. And I learnt a lot, and I appreciated it. And I understood it. And I thought to myself after I'd done the course, how on earth would I do this if I'd not done this course? Like the sky opened and that light was seen. I get it. I understand that I could not do it properly without doing this course. And especially when it came on to the next course. And certainly when I came out here, there's absolutely no way I could have gotten by and done what I did without those courses and the other things I did, because the progressive practice is I went away and taught people, and I then taught people at higher stages. And of course, I'm also being looked at. If I'm going to make a mistake, I'm going to get little, bird in my ear. I never did, but it is nice to know that, and I agree, you need somebody to be above you, to be somebody who will have a bird in your ear. The irony is, here in this environment, the bird in my ear was myself, because I knew that if I made a mistake, it would be seen immediately and I'd get crushed by the dark. I called it the dark side, which is similar to the Einzel situation. I knew I was swimming with sharks. And not only they were wanting me to make mistakes. The dark side were wanting me to make mistakes. But we're going on now to the later on, but it is relevant, I think. So it gave me also confidence. Yeah, confidence.
Yeah,
confidence,
that's what it gives you.
Confidence in all circumstances, even with hostile audiences and senior ranks, where I know what I'm talking about and I will stick to my guns. But if you can prove to me and show me that I'm wrong, I'm going to change my mind.
I 100% agree.
I'm going to change my mind. And I used to always say to people, look, if you've got a better way of doing business, show me. And not only that, once you show me and I go, wow, I'm going to write to the School of Infantry in Great Britain and say to them, which they ask you to, I've now done this for this reason, and I think that drill or skill should be changed or something should be added to it for this reason, and they look at it. And with all their knowledge and expertise, they're going to go, wow, he's got a point, and they will add it, or they look at it and go,
that's how
nah,
this curriculum has been done.
Yeah.
Eventually,
Yeah.
like that's how it got put together. And to me, like this Soviet thing, what also got me thinking, like it's that there is like Neil deGrasse Tyson has this quote: "The challenge of life is to know enough to know you're right, but not enough to know you're wrong." So the challenge of life is to know enough to think you're right, but not enough to know you're wrong. It's like I can teach someone that, hey, this is how you shoot a rifle, and they believe me. This is how military is. They believe you because they haven't actually seen what an actual military looks like. Now, nobody could have bullshitted you that, hey, this is like, hey, come here, look how our chefs are working. This is a good system. You go there and look at like, really? I don't believe you because I know more.
I would say that I disagree a little bit because whilst I have confidence, due to I know that everything I've been taught has been based on not just made up now, and through doing, and that complete cycle of cleansing and adding and lessons learned, but also the open-mindedness that no matter how much you know or expert you were meant to be, you're not infallible. And I think it's very important that although you believe in yourself, and you must do, otherwise it leads to doubt, and you can't be a leader if you just everything you do you doubt. But so whilst I don't doubt myself, I'm still prepared to go, you know what? Could be wrong. Could be. I don't think I am. I'm going to go for it, because there's nothing worse than somebody who ums and ahs.
It's the humility part that has to be there.
Yeah, but so I disagree with that Tyson bloke to a degree. Whilst I'm quite certain I'm right, I'm also quite certain that if somebody offers a good explanation of why I'm wrong, I will accept it. I will accept it. So that's the difference between my mindset and that Soviet mindset, which is the opposite. You've got to qualify what I'm saying, otherwise you're history. And that just leads to that arse-kissing cycle of shit when it's just stagnation. And the only time you find out is we say push comes to shove. Now, and that's not, in our case, it's war. It's war. You mentioned something earlier about people not listening and thinking they're so good they don't. As we said, there's actually a scientific explanation for this. There's been that the people who know little think they know the most. And there's a theory behind this. But what I found is that when it's real time and they might die, the flower opens to the sunshine. Do you understand that, what I'm saying there? Suddenly they're prepared to say, I don't know.
Yeah, they say, okay, now I got it. Tell me more.
Yeah, tell me please. And I've had that quite a few times. And it's been great. Not because I've it's been great because now I know they're open to reason. Yeah, and then once that it had opened to the rays of sunshine, they could be changed quite quickly. Yeah. So the threat of death can open the mind, but it's unfortunate that it takes such a drastic situation.
Yeah, it's the last
to force it.
Last level of escalation.
And the problem is, it could be too late to change it because you've now left. And I have had this problem actually. Excuse me, my dog wants to leave the room.
No worries.
I actually did have this situation once where they were going they were going to a bad place, and they asked me for help. And I said, yeah, no problem. As it turns out, I've got a gap between this course. It's ideal. Yeah, again, the onus is always on them though. They've asked me, I've said yes. I always say yes. If I'm available, yes. But they never turned up. I'm like, okay. Can you make it next week? Yeah, I can make it next week. They never turned up. Now they are going on a mission next week. And they told me that they'd been doing their own training, and because of who they were, and some of those guys had some great experience, but they'd not worked together as a group. And they made the classic mistake of, okay, I'll just explain it this way. So we're now going straight into the live firing phase of what I used to do for the Iraq troop in particular, which was now to live fire all the battle drills. And if you're not trained, it's dangerous. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. And I said, okay, lads, have you done contact drills with two vehicles? Because that's no. Yeah. Okay, so you've done contact front vehicle, rear vehicle out of contact? Yep, done that. Okay, no, I did it live firing. I'll be honest, I broke a few. You see, because of who they were, I had to stop it. And afterwards I said to them, I wasn't hard on them, I just said, look, what have you done? And they did, and he said, we did it on the board. So they did it. They didn't even. So they did an explanation. So they just did it on the board. Here's a vehicle. Here's my vehicle. You do this. You do that. Oh yeah, right, done.
They did it in theory.
That's even minor theory. You know, it doesn't stay in the mind. You've got to do it. You've got to practice all your movements and all the rest of it. And they left it too late. And they were not able to fulfill their mission, and they got put in camp, and they were not able to go out. I was quite sad about that, and so were they. That's the only time, but that wasn't really the best. That wasn't. They were always open, but I can't explain it because of their background. I can't explain why they did that, but it was too late. That was the only time it ever happened to me where I couldn't find enough time due to the guys not turning up to get them ready for what they were going to do. But yeah, it does. But you know, when we did live firing, the point is this: they suddenly went, whoa, yeah, we get it. It's too bloody late. So
yeah,
I had to go.
It becomes more dangerous now.
I knew that if I could continue that day doing it at such a high level, somebody would have got injured, minimum injured or worse. So I stopped that. Yeah. So it's So my main point of this is that war and the threat of death wakes people up. Normally, though, it goes back to something we said before. We've now got time to correct it. Give me 3 months. I can correct it. And I have to admit, what I corrected in 3 months, and I'll explain in detail on the Iraq troop. Mm-hmm. If I said this to the British, they'd laugh at me and say, you can't do that in 3 months. Well, I did. With the Estonians. Great learners. But if you say 3 days, not a chance. So the key point is, when it comes to the reality check, Everybody admits to their failures and are prepared to learn. Now this is at a lower level, and why I said before briefly that the Baltic Battalion had been the Baltic Brigade, a lot of the senior leadership would have been put in a position where that if they had not supported the correct training system, when they'd gone on missions now as the HQ officers, staff in a brigade headquarters, and their men had failed and taken massive casualties due to ineptitude, shit would have flown, and they would have been put on the spot, and they would have suffered the consequences of seeing their men go back in boxes. And then they'd have said, oh shit, there's something wrong. I'd like to think that if they'd worked at that level, they would have been, through our training, would have been, I hate using the word, but indoctrinated through correct training of now that this is the way you do business. And then of course that would then reflect for everybody, because they now, when they go back to the main army in high positions, will then insist upon it happening for all our soldiers, because of course, whilst that mission was pretty naughty with the Afghanistans, well, what do you think it's going to be like with those guys? 10 times worse, 20 times worse. So I feel quite strongly about that. So when it comes to that ultimate pressure of death, people seem to wake up. And I have said some years ago, I hate saying this. I hate saying it. That only that real threat being on the door will make people wake up. The next question is, have we got time to resolve the problem? At the moment, I think we might just get away with it, because things have evolved. The jigsaw piece. We are not starting from the beginning. We are not starting from the beginning. It's just getting the pieces together. I actually had an infantry inspector say to me once, when I pressed him on this about training of conscripts, and his answer was, "They're only conscripts." He said, "We have the Scout Battalion." And that was that, that was like the magic, "We have the Scout Battalion." I said, look, imagine a Scout Battalion, the best battalion in the world. They are. They are. They are. So you're telling me one battalion of the best soldiers in the world are going to defeat that army? Is that what you're trying to tell me? And I also said to him, riddle me. No, it's like the Riddler on Batman. I said, riddle me this. If we are training a conscript army, who are we training them to fight? Because the day they get recalled for service is because of what reason? Therefore, mathematically, it means that they're going to fight who? And you've just said to me, oh, but they're only conscripts. As if, oh, we don't need to bother with them. They're just for doing shit jobs. That was the mindset. Now, this guy was actually a political officer in the Soviet army. And he was what I call a clever idiot. And that is your worst kind of enemy. He is friendly forces, he was clever, but he was an idiot. And he was able to bullshit many people. And he wasn't the only one. Okay, digressing a bit, but it's something we pick up on again,
good. I like it.
We pick up on again. And I used to pull my hair out. It's probably one bald now, with these bastards.
So we have about 10 minutes now. What do we do on Adashi?
Yeah. So let's just get back to. I think it's good we talk about this because it will build up.
It provides the context.
Yeah, and it's why I found it so hard. I mentioned this in an email to you.
Mm-hmm.
I could never explain this to other NATO armies who I've met.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as I started to try and explain it, they'd look at me like I was stupid. And the reason being, I believe, is one, the context, because you need to know other things to make sense of what I'm just saying. Because, for example, Steve, my great friend, who I took that map from,
Mm-hmm.
he did see episode 5, and his debrief was to me, what do you mean they haven't got this, they haven't got that? They must have it. Because he comes from an army that has grown over hundreds of years, and we have all these things in place, so it's like a logical sequence of events. But as I said, like the sausage factory.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't believe that armies can behave when they haven't got the you could say the mechanical components within the machine to produce the sausages. It's just unbelievable. He can't get his head around it. He can't understand it because he's been brought up in such a well organised situation, and they're in disbelief. They're in disbelief
Mm-hmm.
because it can't be so.
Yeah.
But it is so. It
Mm-hmm.
is, and that's why I just called it the craziness. It's the craziness, and I stopped trying to explain it. I'm hoping over these series of podcasts, maybe the message gets across because it's got all these contexts and
Mm-hmm.
you can decide for yourself. Because I do understand that if you came out here on day one from an organised army, and also you work within the bubble of an organised army, because so whilst you may have British Army here, they're working within their own structured bubble. So they don't get to.
Yeah, I
don't
think
get
it's a
to see it.
similar bubble as city people have where the milk is coming.
Yeah.
Like, can you
I'll get
really explain them? It will take so much time that there is a thing called an animal.
Yeah, it
And
comes
you
from a cardboard box.
Yeah. So
I've always got it from a cardboard box.
yeah, and they can't imagine, like, okay, what do you mean you don't have a milk there?
Yeah, I do get it. Yeah. it's so when Steve's a great guy and a great soldier. So when he said that to me, I thought, yeah, that's you can't. The reason why I found it easier to adapt to changing uniforms was because whilst there were many problems on Bulkbat, I still had the bubble of our team and the bubble of overhead protection from the MOU with government to government. When I went to the battle school, if I had not had my previous life with the Baltic Battalion, I would have just, on day one, I would have went, this is just crazy, get me out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's no insult to those great guys in the battle school, but it was just so different to the well-organised, structured. In fact, it was well-organised and structured at the battle school, but they didn't have all these elements that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of understood why, so I didn't freak out. It wasn't comfortable for me. In fact, it was very uncomfortable for me. But I could grasp it in a way that didn't freak me out. Whereas it would have done if I just come from the Commando Training Centre to this place, and as I said, I sent you the photographs. It's just whoa. It's just whoa. And of course, the battle school helped me to integrate when I put on a uniform, because I was at these acclimatization points. Yeah, so getting back to the Baltic Battalion, everything was on donation. So the ammunition was donated to us. The uniforms were donated to us. Now, one of the big donators, what had been chosen, was America would donate the equipment. Britain would donate the instructors. The Nordics would donate the admin doers, like the quartermaster.
Mm-hmm.
The build-up of the infrastructure did take time, and I think it was definitely the weather was getting warmer when the guys got all their uniforms, and we then got some American belt orders and packs and boots and all the rest of the stuff. So in essence, and did we get armour lights? I don't think we got armour lights until they moved into. I'm pretty sure this now. They didn't get. We were carrying AK-47s until we went to Paldiski, and they got their own troops to train, and then the armour lights came through. We'd got the camp after a few months up and running, and we'd got into a routine to train. On the plus side, Adaji has got a massive polygon, and that was fantastic to shoot on. And from that aspect, we actually built some ranges, because they didn't actually have ranges as such. They just had areas where they swooped down and attacked from. So we built our own ranges and put in electric targets, or pits to put in electric targets. And we also, from the recce, found places to conduct all our lessons. So there was no problem with finding a suitable place to conduct our fieldcraft and tactic lessons. And that was something that was a godsend to us at that point. There were some areas in Adaji, however, where we put out of bounds, because we noticed every time we went there, afterwards we felt sick. So we think they'd buried something of not a very nice composition.
Mm.
We certainly didn't try and find out what it was. We just said we're not going to go there again. And on the map we put a grid where out of bounds, don't go there. As to be expected, whilst the training area was really in size fantastic, there was all the infrastructure there that had been smashed, and there was ex-Soviet equipment lying around, gas mask, helmets, that sort of detritus. There was all the Soviet signs. I have to admit, we found that quite fascinating. There was a good road system, so we had lots of good routes to choose to go running on for road runs, and also we were able to get onto the ranges very quickly. So that was good. That was the good news. So things were starting to happen, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There was something. I think this is a good way to finish this. Until we can, next time we start, you see, we can start with the actual training.
Yep.
So now we've covered infrastructure and some of those aspects. I think are just important to know for later.
I agree.
One of the things that I think, there's a couple of things in my life which I think have pressed the button for me to be here today. One of them is my father was offered a job. I think we mentioned this before, and he didn't take it because the wife, my mother, said no, and it was to join the Australian Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was about 5 or 6, maybe even younger, and I can see it now, my father turned around bitterly and said, "I wish I'd taken that job." I'm a kid. I don't know, what's he going on about? But I didn't forget that. In fact, there's 3 things. There's that. There's the conscript soldier on Mount Harriet as a sentry who failed to inform his leadership. Or maybe he did, but they didn't know what to do. So due to poor training, we killed a few. Well, we killed 6. And we then came back and from the information gained, destroyed that location in a battalion attack. And I felt, this may sound strange, but in later life I felt quite sorry for the fact that he'd not been trained properly. And I can't, Sigmund Freud himself would have to analyse me to understand why I would say that, because if he'd been trained properly I wouldn't be sat here now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it because when I came back and changed uniforms, I wanted to help the conscript soldier. Absolutely. And there's something else. Because up until this point in Latvia, it was just, whilst it was fascinating, it was just another job.
Mm.
Until it was the Independence Day for Lithuania. And at the end of play that day, we were invited to the cinema, which was that, in that photograph I show you, the Estonians sat down. In that building, we were invited and we all sat there. And then the Lithuanians came on and they gave a speech about how they demonstrated and suffered during the independence struggle in 1991, and they sang patriotic songs and they explained the importance of freedom, and I nearly cried because I'd taken my freedom as a given, and it really struck home. And these guys were so passionate about being free and kicking the occupation forces out. It was very, very moving. So that was another factor, I think, which when I had to make a decision to come back, I think those 3 factors actually helped me to make, well, such a drastic, life-changing decision into something which I knew was going to be a very difficult, unpleasant situation.
That's how human beings work.
So I think as I'm getting older and got time to open the boxes and analyse why I've done things, I think those are the 3 main points. Well, they are the 3 points of, I think, enabled me to say yes when General Kurt asked me to come back and change uniforms, which we discuss in more detail at a later time. So maybe we can finish on that.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. So,
and as I look forward, I'll talk about getting involved in the training in Adaji and other topics and other rabbit holes we get onto.
Yeah, absolutely. So see you on the next episode when we start talking about the training.
Yeah, so great to talk to you today.
Yep.
Remo, and I'll see you when I see you.
Yep, bye-bye.
Bye.